The crowd fell silent as Emily Hayes approached the final jump. When the horse was galloping to the jump, Emily couldn't see the distance, and the final jump was ending in a disaster. Emily Hayes fell so hard on the ground and couldn't move her legs. The championship that had been within her grasp, just one more obstacle between her and the gold medal that would cement her place among the elite riders of her generation, was now shattered like her dreams. 17 years old, with a lifetime of victories already behind her, Emily had sat tall and confident atop Frost, her magnificent white Andalusian gelding. The horse had been her partner for 5 years, carrying her from local competitions to national prominence with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. As Frost had galloped toward the formidable oxer set at 1.60 meters, the highest of the competition, Emily had suddenly lost her feel for the distance. The rhythm that had been so perfect throughout their round faltered, the careful mathematics of strides to take-off point becoming a blur in her mind. A cold wave of uncertainty washed over her as she realized they were approaching at the wrong pace, too fast and too close. In that critical moment, Emily hesitated, her signals to Frost becoming confused. The white horse, sensing her uncertainty, but committed to the jump, gathered himself awkwardly, his powerful muscles bunched beneath his gleaming coat as he launched into the air from the wrong spot, too early and without proper balance. The crowd's collective gasp was audible as Frost's front hooves clipped the top rail. The disruption to his momentum was catastrophic, sending him tumbling forward instead of arcing over the obstacle. Emily felt herself pitched violently from the saddle, the world spinning around her as she was thrown through the air. The impact with the ground came with a sickening force that drove the breath from her lungs. A heartbeat later, Frost's massive body crashed down beside her, his weight rolling across both her legs with a terrible pressure. The sound of bones snapping was audible, even above the shouting that erupted from the stands. Emily Hayes lay motionless in the dirt, staring up at the arena lights with uncomprehending eyes. She tried to move, but found with rising panic that her legs wouldn't respond to any command. They lay twisted beneath her, completely numb, as though they no longer belonged to her body. The sound that escaped her lips wasn't quite a scream, more a gasp of disbelief as white-hot pain exploded through her lower body. The arena erupted in shouts and movement. Medical staff sprinted across the field as Frost struggled to his feet, trembling and confused, leaving Emily broken on the ground. Through a haze of agony, Emily registered the faces appearing above her, their expressions telling her everything she didn't want to know. In that moment, watching the medical team exchange grim glances as they immobilized her legs, Emily somehow understood that her life had just been divided into two distinct parts, before the fall and everything that would come after. As consciousness slipped away, her last thought was of Frost, whether he was injured, whether she would ever ride again. The darkness took her before she could form an answer. The hospital room was clinically white and sterile, much like the bandages that encased both of Emily's legs from thigh to ankle. 2 weeks had passed since the accident, though time had lost its meaning in the haze of surgeries and pain medication. The fog in her mind had finally begun to clear, allowing the full weight of her situation to settle over her like a suffocating blanket. Dr. Matthews stood at the foot of her bed, clipboard in hand, his expression carefully controlled in that way medical professionals develop after delivering bad news thousands of times. Emily's parents flanked her bed, her mother's eyes red-rimmed from crying, her father's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles visibly strained against his skin. The doctor spoke with methodical precision, detailing the extent of her injuries as if reading from a technical manual. Both femurs fractured, complete tibial fractures in both legs, multiple fibular fractures, extensive nerve damage, compromised blood vessels, 6 surgeries already completed, with more potentially to come. Metal rods, screws, and plates, now holding together what had once been the strong, resilient legs of a champion athlete. Emily absorbed each word, filing them away with mechanical detachment, until Dr. Matthews reached the conclusion of his assessment. The words hung in the antiseptic air like a death sentence. Competitive riding would no longer be possible. Walking normally again would be considered a significant achievement. Running, jumping, or any high-impact activity was out of the question. Her mother began to speak, her voice breaking as she reached for her daughter's hand. She implored Emily to be realistic about the situation, emphasizing that Dr. Matthews was one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the country. If he made a prognosis, they needed to trust his expertise. Emily interrupted, her voice quiet but unyielding. The certainty in her tone contrasted sharply with her frail appearance, as she firmly stated that the doctor was wrong about her never walking again. The conviction in her words hung in the sterile air, challenging the medical verdict that had just been delivered. Her father sighed, exchanging a worried glance with her mother. He gently attempted to reason with her, explaining that this wasn't about willpower. The damage was extensive. They needed to start thinking about adjustments to the house, her education, a different future, practical considerations that acknowledged her new reality. Emily's response was unwavering. Her future hadn't changed. She insisted, only the path to get there. Her gaze remained fixed on the rectangular patch of sky, visible through the window, as if drawing strength from the world beyond the hospital walls. Dr. Matthews cleared his throat, clearly accustomed to this phase of denial. He attempted to caution Emily about the dangers of false hope, suggesting that unrealistic expectations could be more damaging than acceptance. Emily cut him off, turning her gaze to meet his directly. With quiet intensity, she asserted that this was her body, and she knew what it was capable of better than anyone in the room. The statement wasn't delivered as a teenager's rebellion, but as a fundamental truth she held with absolute certainty. Her parents looked stricken, torn between admiration for her spirit and fear that this denial would make her inevitable adjustment all the more painful. Her mother began to cry softly, while her father placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. He spoke gently, trying to convince Emily that sometimes they had to accept what the experts said. Her parents only wanted what was best for her, which meant listening to Dr. Matthews and preparing for the reality ahead. Emily responded with quiet intensity, stating that what was best for her was for everyone to stop telling her what she couldn't do. She would walk again. She would ride again. And she didn't need anyone's permission or approval to believe that. The doctor continued speaking, mentioning rehabilitation options and adaptive sports. But Emily had stopped listening. The only sound in her ears was the thundering of hooves, Frost's hooves, carrying her over jump after jump in flawless arcs against blue skies. Memories of freedom now taunting her from what suddenly seemed like another lifetime. That night, after her parents had left and the nurses had completed their rounds, Emily lay awake in the darkness. The pain in her legs was a constant throbbing reminder of everything she had lost. For the first time since the accident, she allowed herself to cry, not the soft weeping of sadness, but harsh, body-racking sobs of rage and defiance. By morning, her pillow was soaked with tears, but something had shifted inside her. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the window, Emily made a silent promise to herself. The doctors had delivered their verdict. Her parents had accepted it, but she would not. This was not the end of her story, but merely the beginning of a different chapter. She would walk again. She would ride again. She would defy every limitation they had placed upon her, one excruciating step at a time. Emily Hayes believed in her own strength more than any medical prognosis, and that belief would become the foundation of everything that followed. Returning home after 3 months in the hospital should have felt like a victory, but as Emily's father carried her from the car to the wheelchair waiting on their driveway, the weight of her new reality pressed down upon her shoulders. The Hayes family home sat on 15 acres of rolling Kentucky countryside, with a 6-stall barn where Frost and their other horses resided. Once, this land had been Emily's kingdom, a place where she'd spent every free moment training, riding, and dreaming of championships. Now, looking out at the familiar landscape from the confines of her wheelchair, Emily felt like an exile in her own territory. The doctors had been clear. Her rehabilitation would be measured in years, not months. The wheelchair would be her primary mode of transportation for the foreseeable future. Her parents had transformed their home in accordance with the medical recommendations. Her bedroom had been relocated to the first floor, another reminder that stairs were now among the countless everyday obstacles that had transformed from mindless actions into impossible challenges. Adaptive equipment had been installed throughout the home: grab bars, ramps, modified bathroom fixtures. Each accommodation was simultaneously necessary and a bitter reminder of her limitations. What her parents didn't know was that Emily had begun experimenting with reducing her pain medication. The doctors had warned against this, explaining that pain could hinder recovery. But Emily had discovered something important. The pain kept her focused, kept her angry, kept her fighting, and she needed that fire. Every morning at breakfast, Emily would watch her mother sort through the numerous pill bottles that now governed her days: pain medications, anti-inflammatories, nerve stabilizers, a pharmaceutical arsenal designed to manage her condition, not cure it. Her mother would slide the daily assortment across the table with a forced smile and watchful eyes, making sure Emily took each one. The first weeks at home passed in a blur of pain management, home healthcare visits, and crushing disappointment. Emily's once muscular body began to change. Muscle atrophy set in. Despite the basic exercises the physical therapist led her through, the champion's physique that she had built through years of dedicated training withered with alarming speed, as if her body were abandoning her just as her dreams had. Her parents, well-meaning but suffocating in their concern, followed Dr. Matthews' recommendations to the letter. They spoke often about realistic expectations and accepting limitations, while making plans for Emily's future that pointedly excluded any mention of riding. They researched wheelchair-accessible colleges, careers suitable for someone with her disabilities, and support groups for former athletes. Their kitchen counter became cluttered with pamphlets about living a full life with physical limitations. Her mother would frequently remind Emily that they only wanted what was best for her. These conversations always circled back to the same message. The doctors knew what they were talking about, and fighting against reality would only bring her more pain. Emily would nod silently during these conversations, not trusting herself to respond without unleashing the volcano of frustration building inside her. Her parents saw only what was in front of them: a broken girl in a wheelchair. They couldn't see what Emily felt with absolute certainty: that this condition was temporary, a challenge to be overcome rather than a fate to be accepted. During her scheduled physical therapy sessions, Emily performed each exercise exactly as instructed, never revealing that she was doing twice the recommended repetitions. In the privacy of her room, late at night when the house was quiet and her parents were asleep, she would pull herself from her bed to the floor, using her arms to drag her unresponsive lower body through additional strengthening exercises she had researched online. These secret sessions left her drenched in sweat and often in tears from the pain. But each morning she would join her parents for breakfast with a placid expression that revealed nothing of her nighttime battles. The war she was waging would be fought on her terms, not theirs, and certainly not according to the limiting predictions of doctors who saw her as a statistic rather than a fighter. Perhaps the cruelest element of her new existence was her proximity to what she had lost. From her bedroom window, Emily could see the barn and the paddock where Frost now spent his days. Her parents had considered selling him after the accident, but Emily had reacted with such uncharacteristic desperation to this suggestion that they quickly abandoned the idea. Emily's response was immediate and flat with certainty. She would ride him again. There was no question in her mind, no room for doubt. Each morning, Emily would watch as the stable hand led Frost out to the paddock. The magnificent white horse would trot a few steps, then stop and turn toward the house, as if searching for his missing rider. Sometimes he would stand at the fence for hours, gazing toward Emily's window. Seeing him healthy, strong, and free was both torment and motivation. One evening, her father found Emily watching Frost from her window. He gently suggested that perhaps she should consider letting the horse go to someone who could ride him. It wasn't fair, he explained, to keep a performance horse like that without proper exercise and training. Her father sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. He began to explain, once more, that even if she regained some walking ability, the strength and balance required for equestrian sports would be beyond her reach. According to Dr. Matthews, Emily cut him off, never taking her eyes off the white horse in the distance. She informed him that Dr. Matthews didn't know her, and neither did her father if he thought she was giving up. These confrontations became more frequent as weeks turned to months, her parents desperate to see their daughter accept what they viewed as inevitable. Arranged for a therapist to visit the house, Emily sat through these sessions in stony silence, answering questions with minimal responses, while her mind worked on recovery plans the therapist would never hear about. The darkest moment came on a stormy afternoon in late autumn. Nearly 6 months after the fall, Emily had insisted on wheeling herself out to the covered arena to watch her former coach work with a younger rider. She positioned herself in a corner, partially hidden by equipment, and observed as the girl, no more than 14, executed a flawless jumping routine on a chestnut mare. Watching someone else live her dream unleashed a wave of bitterness so intense it threatened to consume her. That night, alone in her room, with rain lashing against the windows, Emily reached her lowest point. The pain, both physical and emotional, seemed insurmountable. The future stretched before her like an endless desert, with no oasis in sight. Her parents' words echoed in her mind. Be realistic. Accept what cannot be changed. Listen to the doctors. Part of her wondered if they might be right, if her stubbornness was merely delaying an inevitable acceptance that would ultimately bring peace. As if sensing her surrender, Frost let out a loud, plaintive whinny from the barn, a sound so distinctive, Emily would have recognized it anywhere. It cut through the storm and penetrated the walls of the house, reaching her like a call from another world. The sound pierced the veil of her despair, reminding her of the connection that transcended her broken body. That night, Emily slept with her window open despite the rain, listening to the occasional sounds from the barn. By morning, something had shifted within her. The darkness hadn't lifted entirely, but a sliver of light had broken through, just enough to illuminate the next step forward. She would not merely defy her doctors. She would prove to everyone, her parents, her therapist, the entire world, that had written her off, that her belief in herself was stronger than their collective doubt. Her own strength would become her salvation, regardless of who stood beside her on the journey. The turning point came not as a dramatic epiphany, but as a quiet resolution, born from the depths of Emily's despair. On a cold December morning, exactly 7 months after the accident, she wheeled herself to the full-length mirror in her bedroom and truly looked at herself for the first time since returning home. The reflection that stared back was a stranger, pale, thin, with hollowed cheeks and dull eyes that had once sparkled with determination. Her once athletic form now appeared diminished, shoulders hunched forward from months of wheelchair use. The scars on her legs, visible beneath the hem of her shorts, told the story of her broken body in jagged lines of pink and white. Emily studied this unfamiliar version of herself for long minutes, cataloging every change, every loss. Then, with deliberate movements, she straightened her spine, pulled back her shoulders, and lifted her chin, a posture reminiscent of her stance in the saddle. The transformation was subtle but profound. In her eyes a spark reignited, not the carefree confidence of before, but something deeper and more formidable. That same day, Emily called Dr. Matthews herself, not her parents, who had been managing her medical care with loving but sometimes suffocating attention. She requested full documentation of her injuries, prognosis, and all recommended treatment plans. When the thick envelope arrived 3 days later, she spread the contents across her bed and began to educate herself on every aspect of her condition. Medical terminology became her second language. She researched each procedure she had undergone, studied the mechanics of her injuries, and investigated alternative treatments and rehabilitation techniques. Emily approached her recovery with the same methodical dedication she had once applied to perfecting a jumping routine. Next came the development of her own supplementary rehabilitation program. Emily reached out to specialists in sports medicine, seeking those who had worked with athletes overcoming catastrophic injuries. She connected with former riders who had survived similar accidents, absorbing their experiences and advice. Most importantly, she found a physical therapist who didn't flinch when she stated her ultimate goal: to ride competitively again. Nathan Chen was not like the other medical professionals Emily had encountered, a former competitive swimmer whose career had ended after a car accident. He understood the mind of an athlete in ways her previous therapists had not. When Emily outlined her ambitions during their first session, Nathan didn't respond with pitying smiles or gentle discouragement. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully and simply stated that they would need to work harder than she had ever worked before. Those words became the foundation of the next phase of Emily's life. The regimen they developed together was punishing, far more intensive than what her doctors had prescribed. Each morning began before dawn with stretching exercises designed to maintain flexibility while her bones continued to heal. Throughout the day, Emily rotated through various therapies: water exercises in the pool her parents had installed at her insistence, strength training for her upper body, and gradually, painfully, movement therapies for her damaged legs. Every minute was scheduled. Every exercise counted. Every small improvement meticulously documented in the journal she kept by her bed. The pain was constant, sometimes manageable, often excruciating, but Emily came to recognize it as the price of her ambition. She learned to differentiate between the pain of damage and the pain of healing, pushing through the latter while respecting the former. Nights that had once been haunted by nightmares became instead filled with exhaustion-induced dreamless sleep. The phantom pains receded, replaced by the very real soreness of muscles being rebuilt and nerves reawakening. Even her relationship with the wheelchair evolved, no longer a prison, but a temporary tool, one she was determined to outgrow. The most significant addition to her recovery plan came 3 months into her work with Nathan. Against her parents' concerns and initial medical advice, Emily insisted on being taken to the barn daily. Not to ride, she was still far from that goal, but to reconnect with the world that had defined her. At first, she simply sat in her wheelchair near Frost's stall, talking to him and offering treats from her lap. Gradually, she progressed to grooming him, her arms strengthening as she brushed his white coat to a gleaming shine. Later, she began assisting the stable hands with minor tasks, then more complex ones, finding ways to adapt each activity to her capabilities. Frost, who had grown listless in the months following the accident, responded to Emily's renewed presence with visible excitement. The bond between them, forged through years of trust and partnership, had not been broken by the fall, but merely suspended. As Emily's determination grew, so did Frost's energy and spirit, as if the horse somehow understood the journey they were undertaking together. 1 year after the accident, Emily took her first unassisted steps. They were ungainly and painful, supported by specialized braces and followed immediately by exhaustion, so profound she slept for 14 hours afterward. But they were steps proof that the impossible was perhaps merely difficult. The road ahead remained daunting, with countless obstacles still to overcome, but Emily had found her North Star, the purpose that would guide her through the darkest moments of her recovery. In the simple act of standing on her own feet again, she had declared her resolution. She would defy every limitation, rewrite every prognosis, and find her way back to the life she was meant to live. She would defy every limitation, rewrite every prognosis, and find her way back to the life she was meant to live. The second year of Emily's recovery was marked by a series of battles. Some won, some lost, all hard-fought. Her progress, while steady, did not follow a linear path. There were weeks of breakthrough improvements followed by devastating setbacks. Infections that required additional surgeries, bone fragments that needed removal, nerve pain that flared without warning, leaving her bedridden and frustrated. Through it all, Emily adhered to her regimen with religious devotion. The wheelchair gave way to forearm crutches, then to a single cane. Each transition represented months of grueling work, thousands of repetitions, and countless moments when giving up seemed like the only sensible option. Nathan remained by her side, adapting their program as her capabilities evolved. He pushed when she needed pushing, and pulled back when her determination threatened to override her body's limitations. On the days when pain clouded her vision and doubts crowded her mind, he would remind her of how far she had come, not where she had yet to go. Emily's 18th birthday passed, then her 19th. Her former competitors moved on to collegiate teams or professional circuits. Occasionally, she would receive messages from the riding world, former rivals or admirers checking on her progress. Some offered genuine support. Others were merely curious about the fallen champion. Emily answered them all with the same measured response. She was working on her recovery and looked forward to returning to competition someday. The feeling of being on horseback again, even in this limited, controlled capacity, brought tears to her eyes. Her body remembered this connection, this partnership with an animal that had been central to her identity since childhood. The therapy rides were brief at first, focused more on muscle memory and balance than anything resembling her former abilities. But they rekindled something essential within her spirit. What she didn't share were the details of her daily struggles or the ambitious training schedule she had established. At 20 months post-accident, Emily began incorporating adaptive riding into her rehabilitation, using a specially designed saddle with additional support and working with an equine therapy specialist. She mounted a gentle therapy horse for the first time since the fall. At the 2-year mark, Emily's medical team conducted a comprehensive evaluation of her progress. The results surprised even the most optimistic among them. The bone density in her legs had improved significantly. Her muscle tone, while still not matching her pre-accident condition, had developed beyond what most had thought possible. The nerve damage, while permanent in some areas, had shown unexpected regeneration in others. Frost watched these sessions from a neighboring paddock, his attention fixed on Emily with an intensity that the therapy specialists found remarkable. The white horse would follow their movements, nickering softly when Emily dismounted, as if offering encouragement. Dr. Matthews, reviewing the findings with poorly concealed astonishment, finally asked the question that had been lingering unspoken. What exactly was Emily's goal? Her answer was simple and unwavering: to compete again, to jump again. The doctor's expression cycled through disbelief, concern, and reluctant admiration. He didn't say it was impossible, not anymore. Instead, he outlined the risks in careful, clinical terms. The plates and screws in her legs would always be vulnerable to impact. Another fall could result in damage beyond repair. The pain would likely never fully disappear. Her competitive edge, the natural athleticism and fearlessness that had made her a champion, might be permanently altered. Emily listened, absorbing each caution and warning with respectful attention. When he finished, she thanked him for his honesty, then responded with equal frankness. She understood the risks. She accepted the potential consequences, but remaining earthbound when she was born to fly was not a compromise she was willing to make. That evening, Emily asked to visit Frost alone. Her parents, recognizing something significant in her request, helped her to the barn and then withdrew, leaving horse and rider in privacy for the first time since the accident. No words were needed between them. 27 months of separation had not diminished their connection, but rather transformed it into something more profound. They had both been changed by the fall. Frost had not jumped competitively since that day either, as if waiting for his true rider to return. Emily stood before Frost's stall, leaning on her cane, but otherwise unsupported. The great white horse approached cautiously, stretching his neck over the half door to nuzzle her shoulder with familiar affection. Emily ran her hand along his face, tracing the distinctive whorl of hair between his eyes that had always been her favorite feature. The climb ahead remained steep, the summit still distant and shrouded in uncertainty. But for the first time since the accident, Emily could envision reaching it, not as the person she had been before, but as the woman she was becoming through this crucible of pain and perseverance. Emily produced an apple from her pocket, offering it on a flat palm, as she had thousands of times before. As Frost's lips gently took the treat, Emily made him a silent promise. They would jump again together, whatever it took. 3 years and 4 months after the fall that had shattered her body and nearly broken her spirit, Emily Hayes stood at the entrance to the covered arena, breathing deeply of the familiar scents of hay, leather, and horse. Dawn had barely broken over the Kentucky hills, bathing the world in a gentle golden light that seemed to Emily like a blessing, or perhaps a spotlight. She wore her competition attire for the first time since the accident. Immaculate white breeches, polished tall boots that concealed the specialized braces supporting her ankles, a crisp show shirt, and a navy jacket with her stable's insignia embroidered on the breast pocket. Her helmet was new, a necessary concession to the heightened safety protocols she now embraced. But everything else carried the comforting patina of past victories. Beside her stood Frost, groomed to perfection, his white coat gleaming like fresh snow in the early morning light. The horse seemed to sense the significance of the moment, standing unusually still save for the occasional toss of his head, as if impatient to begin. This private session represented the culmination of everything Emily had fought for since that catastrophic day. Her journey back to this moment had been incremental and painstaking. After 2.5 years of rehabilitation, she had finally mounted Frost again. First simply sitting on him in the stall, then walking him on a lead line, gradually progressing to independent riding at a walk, then a trot. The first canter had reduced her to tears, not from pain, but from the overwhelming joy of feeling that familiar rhythm beneath her once more. Each milestone thereafter had been approached with methodical caution, riding without stirrups to improve her seat and balance, incorporating subtle jumps no higher than a foot off the ground, gradually increasing the technical difficulty of their training sessions. Nathan had transitioned from physical therapist to personal trainer, developing specialized exercises to address the unique demands of equestrian competition. Emily's medical team had expanded to include sports medicine specialists who monitored her progress and adjusted her support equipment as needed. The metal in her legs would always remain, but she had learned to work with it rather than against it, adapting her riding style to accommodate her new physical reality. Now, as the sun crested the horizon, Emily prepared for the final test she had set for herself. A complete jumping course, with heights approaching competition level, not the 1.60 meter oxer that had claimed her future 3 years ago, but substantial enough to prove to herself more than anyone that her return was real. No spectators were present, beyond her parents, Nathan, and her riding coach, all of whom watched in respectful silence from the sidelines. This moment belonged to Emily and Frost alone, a private reclamation of what had been lost. With a barely perceptible movement of her legs weaker than before, but infinitely more valued, Emily signaled to Frost. The white horse moved forward with the fluid grace that had made them champions, responding to her cues with the sensitivity of a partner who could anticipate her needs before she expressed them. They began with a walking circuit of the arena, then progressed to a trot, establishing their rhythm and communication. When Emily finally asked for a canter, Frost transitioned seamlessly, his powerful stride carefully measured beneath her. The pain in Emily's legs was present, but manageable, a familiar companion rather than an overwhelming adversary. The jumps awaited them, arranged in a challenging sequence that would test their technical skills and partnership. Emily approached the first obstacle, a simple vertical set at 3 feet. With focused concentration, the memories of her fall threatened to surface, a moment of hesitation flickering through her mind as they neared the takeoff point. But then something remarkable happened. As if sensing her uncertainty, Frost gathered himself beneath her with unusual care, adjusting his stride to create the perfect distance to the jump. The message in this subtle change was clear. "Trust me as I trust you." Emily released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, relaxed her grip on the reins, and gave herself over to the partnership that had defined her life. They soared over the first jump with room to spare, landing with a solidarity that sent a jolt of exhilaration through Emily's body. From that moment, everything else fell away. The pain, the fear, the years of struggle. Horse and rider moved through the course with increasing confidence, tackling each obstacle with precision and harmony. Emily's adapted riding style was evident in subtle ways. She relied more on balance and timing than strength, used her seat and voice more than her legs to communicate, but the essential grace that had made her a champion remained intact. As they cleared the final combination, an oxer followed by a tight turn to a triple bar, Emily felt a profound sense of completion wash over her. They cantered to the center of the arena and came to a halt. Frost's sides heaving slightly from the effort, Emily's heart pounding with triumph. In the silence that followed, broken only by Frost's rhythmic breathing and the distant call of birds welcoming the new day, Emily placed her hand on the horse's warm neck. The touch contained a world of meaning, gratitude, partnership, and a profound understanding that while the future remained uncertain, they had already achieved something remarkable. No one spoke as Emily dismounted with careful movements, her boots touching the ground with the deliberate precision that all her activities now required. She would never again move with the careless fluidity of youth. The fall had ensured that pain would remain her constant companion, and certain physical limitations were permanent. But standing there in the morning light, one hand on Frost's reins and the other resting lightly on her cane, Emily Hayes was not defined by what she had lost, but by what she had reclaimed. Through sheer force of will, the journey had transformed her from a talented girl with dreams of glory into a woman of uncommon resilience and depth. Whether she would compete publicly again remained a question for another day. The private victory of this morning was enough for now, proof that the human spirit, properly tempered by adversity and fueled by unwavering determination, could indeed rise from the most devastating falls. As Emily led Frost from the arena toward the rising sun, her gait slightly uneven but her head held high, she embodied a truth more powerful than any championship title. Some victories aren't measured by gold medals and applause, but by the quiet triumph of standing tall in the face of impossible odds and daring to reclaim what was thought to be forever lost. In the soft Kentucky dawn, that truth shone more brilliantly than any trophy ever could. What impossible dream are you ready to pursue? Like Emily, you possess the strength to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Take the first step today on your journey that no one thought possible. Remember, broken dreams can be rebuilt stronger than before. Please hit the like and subscribe button when you never give up on your dreams.